After hammering Champions League giants Real Madrid to progress to their first semi-final of the European competition since 2009, Mikel Arteta's side were brought back to earth swiftly by Paris Saint-Germain, who left the Emirates Stadium 1-0 up in the first leg of the tie. Where did it all go wrong? Why were PSG so dominant, especially in the first half? Can Arsenal turn this around and get to the final? To chat about all these things and more is French football expert Jonathan Johnson. Jonathan, great to have you with us. So first up, what was your reaction to the result? Did the game go how you expected? I mean, PSG have won 5 of their last 7 away knockout stage games in the competition.
Yeah, it was more or less how I expected sort of PSG to play. I will admit, though, that I was impressed by their determination, by their discipline as well. And we kind of got a preview of that. They knocked Liverpool out at Anfield a couple of rounds ago. Obviously, when they went to Villa Park, that was one of the rare occasions where they were beaten on the road in a knockout game. But it has sort of been developing over the last couple of months, this newfound solid team chemistry that PSG have, which I think has taken many people by surprise because it's not something that historically we've seen from PSG sides in the past, especially when they've had big star names, the likes of Kylian Mbappe, the likes of Lionel Messi, the likes of Neymar. So I think this is really a new face of PSG that we're seeing. But I actually had them down to draw 1-1. Away from home. So if the disallowed goal early in the second half had stood, I probably would have been bang on pretty much with my assessment. But then you look at some of the chances PSG had late on, and you could also argue that they really should have won by more goals. I think there's many Arsenal fans who feel that they were outplayed and that perhaps they were fortunate that PSG weren't sharper in their finishing, which you could really argue has been PSG's Achilles heel in the last couple of years in the Champions League. It was that inefficiency in front of goal, which stopped them from advancing to the final last year. This obviously being a second consecutive semi-final. And again, they could come to rue those opportunities missed late on in London next week.
And what has the reaction towards Arsenal been like in France? I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about the tifo that they did and the atmosphere and things, but yeah, what's the reaction been like in France?
I think there's been one of surprise. I think many people in France expected Arsenal to probably be a little too strong for PSG. I think there is also sort of mitigating factors. You know, Arsenal have a couple of players who were either unavailable for the first leg or have been ruled out until the end of the season. So obviously that complicates things a little bit. What's actually been really interesting, certainly within the PSG fan base, is sort of the observations of Mikel Arteta as a manager, because obviously he has previous playing for PSG early on in his playing career. And although PSG did come up against Arsenal back in the league phase, I think there was a bit of surprise within the PSG fan base and also within the French football fan base in general at some of his comments, or the nature of some of his comments after the game, which is something that I think is kind of par for the course with Arsenal games in the Premier League. Arteta can sometimes make quite abrasive comments. But also, I think it's a bit of an eye-opener because many people in France had sort of wondered, similar with Maurizio Pochettino, if at some point in his future, Mikel Arteta might be sort of targeted as a possible future managerial target for PSG. So I think that has now perhaps started to change some people's opinions. But overall, I think there was an expectation that PSG would probably find this a stretch too far, having been so heroic against Liverpool at Anfield, and then having gotten through despite a bit of a scare against Villa. So this, I wouldn't say it's uncharted territory, but not many people had PSG down for defending a 1-goal lead coming into the second leg at home.
Safe to say Arteta might have burnt a few bridges with the with the PSG fans then. I mean, talking about PSG's manager, Luis Enrique, he's really turned this team into a force to be reckoned with after what a lot of people feel was, a poor start to the season. What is his secret?
That's a really good question, because I think there's a number of things that have changed. I think there's generally the maturity within the group of players. You look at that squad, you look at it on paper and you look at it on the pitch, and it's a collection of very young players. I wouldn't say that they're all inexperienced, but clearly when they go up against more experienced teams, the age difference, sometimes does count against them. They're also not the most physical of teams, which is why I think, we've seen Arsenal across the 2 games that they've played so far this season, go follow quite an aerial route at times and try to make the most of the sort of physical advantage that they have, certainly in terms of the height of some of the more attack-minded players. But I think the main change for Luis Enrique has been the slight tactical adjustment, moving Ousmane Dembele into a more central position. Obviously, he scored the crucial goal so far that divides the two teams. But also, I think, there's been an acceptance from within the PSG players that there is sort of a strongest set 11, and that is generally the 11 that Luis Enrique has stuck to now for the last couple of months. There's also a renewed sense of belief. I think earlier on in the season, in the league phase, when they were staring down the barrel at potential elimination before having to go away at Red Bull Salzburg, win at home against Manchester City, and then go away to Stuttgart again and win all three of those games to advance. I think there was a moment where PSG said to themselves, if we can make it through this, we can basically make it through anything. And at that moment, I think the club really backed Luis Enrique and his star players. We saw a glut of contract extensions a couple of months ago, including Luis Enrique himself. So I think there's just really this kind of feeling of confidence and of harmony flowing through PSG for the first time in quite a long time. And it was, to be fair to him, something that Luis Enrique hinted at last season with Kylian Mbappe on the verge of joining Real Madrid. There was constant speculation about his future, and Luis Enrique was always very clear that he was building at that moment a PSG side that could be competitive in the future without Kylian Mbappe. And I think having that weight off of PSG's shoulders has also, played a part, because it was an extremely young and inexperienced side that made it all the way to the Champions League semi-finals last season and just fell short. Obviously, they've got a bit more experience this season, having already gone through that. So there is a feeling that this is a team that's, still growing, still in development, but is already, quite a significant threat to some major European teams.
It's interesting that you say that, because in previous seasons, I guess, as an outsider looking in, PSG haven't been taken completely seriously in the latter stages of the Champions League. People have, they've been the butt of the joke quite a few times with the amount of money that they spent, etc. Do you think that's what's changed then? Maybe the departure of Mbappe has made them play as more of a cohesive unit. They have a manager that's been backed and they've got all this talent. Do you think that's what's maybe changed things a little bit, that people are taking them a lot more seriously?
Yeah, it is nice to see people sort of sitting up and taking notice of PSG and sort of putting a bit of respect on their name. I think it's something that's been a long time coming, because PSG have had, over the years now, a number of very, very good sides with a lot of talent. But I always think that there was an overbearing element to some of the star power that PSG had, which kind of outweighed, some of the good potential collective chemistry that could have been built up. I think it really came to a head with Kylian Mbappe when there was obviously tension between him and the club going into his final season, which was always going to make things complicated, especially once he made up his mind to finally go to Real Madrid. As fans across Europe probably saw and were probably quite shocked at the time, the PSG fans essentially spoke out against both Neymar and Lionel Messi about feeling that the club was moving in the wrong direction, and that the star players who'd been brought in hadn't really lived up to their reputations. Obviously, with Neymar and Messi, there were sort of different kind of standards that they were being held to. Neymar obviously had a lot of injury problems as well, but there was a feeling that once they moved on, if Mbappe would be focused, that maybe PSG would be able to get it together. It wasn't quite the case last year when they dropped out in the semi-finals against Borussia Dortmund, who, with all due respect, given that they went to the final, many people had PSG down as favourites going into that game. But I do think now that there is an element of PSG finally having earned the respect of a lot of people, especially those who are unfamiliar with sort of French football on a week-to-week basis, who just assume that PSG sort of crush, all who, stand in front of them in the league, which isn't always the case. Obviously, they've had a very dominant season in Ligue 1 this season, but they've been run close in a couple of recent years. So, I do think it's been part of this upward trend, or this uptick in form for French teams in general on the continent. And it's important for French football that PSG are still that flagship team that performs strongest and is are the final league representatives left standing in European competition. And I think as well, when you look at the future that this team potentially has together under Luis Enrique and the way that they're playing, one of the youngest and most vibrant teams in Europe at this moment in time. It does feel like the future's bright, and I think people are waking up to the fact that PSG, as well as being quite a good side to watch now, could be even more exciting in the future.
I need to ask because Arsenal fans will probably be Googling a lot about Ousmane Dembele, the injury. He came off in the second half holding his hamstring. Is there an update on that at all?
There hasn't been a major update for the moment, but it is my understanding that he's been undergoing tests. It would be a surprise to me to see PSG risk him over the weekend because there's no real reason to. The league title's already sewn up. The unbeaten run now in the league, has also gone. So there's no reason to sort of play too many of the main players if there's any sort of slight concerns ahead of the second leg. So I think it will be a bit touch and go. It sounded like Luis Enrique was optimistic that it wasn't too serious immediately after the game, but obviously we'll only know in the coming days how that develops. It would be a big blow for PSG if Dembele wasn't able to start. But then again, when you look at some of the selections that Luis Enrique has made over the course of the season, sometimes he does like to rotate out some of his star attacking talent, and it's not like PSG are short on that at this moment in time when you look at some of the players that were on display in the first leg. So I do think that PSG, should Dembele be ruled out or only be able to feature from the bench, that they'd still pose plenty of threats to Arsenal. But there's no doubt about it, given his form, especially in the last couple of months, and sort of the role that he has played in the turnaround in form that you asked me about earlier. He's been absolutely key in, those kind of goals, especially, if that proves to be decisive in the first leg, is the kind of thing that could set him on the course for potentially being in the discussion for a Ballon d'Or win.
Switching our attention to Arsenal now, where did it all go wrong for them? Were you surprised that they maybe didn't dominate the game more, considering what they did against Real Madrid?
I think there was always a risk that fans would expect to see, that kind of performance replicated. It's very, very difficult to replicate that sort of incredible showing that, really takes everybody by surprise. And I think maybe Arsenal took themselves by surprise. And that's not, that's not a slight on Arsenal not believing, that they couldn't overcome a team like Real Madrid. I think probably, Real Madrid's lower level than in recent years maybe took them by surprise in that first leg in terms of how straightforward it was to get the job done, and then ultimately over the two legs, to emerge with quite an impressive winning margin. But I do think that in terms of the game, Arsenal obviously allowing PSG to be able to take that early chance, I think that did a world of good for PSG in terms of their in terms of their optimism for the remainder of the game and their motivation levels. I also think that in terms of the opportunities that Arsenal created, there was the Martinelli opportunity, which Donnarumma made the save on in the first half, which, looking back on it, kind of looks a bit gilt-edged now. But at the same time, PSG had opportunities that they didn't take. So you could say that, PSG could still be punished for not taking that later on. I do think that the game could have swung in Arsenal's favour had the offside header from Marino been allowed to stand. That does feel like it was a bit of a turning point in the game. But overall, I don't think that Arsenal imposed themselves physically enough. Many people will point to the absence of Thomas Partey in the midfield and say that without him, it was always going to be difficult, especially up against PSG's midfield trio when you've got somebody like Fabio Ruiz, who has as much experience as he has playing in the kind of form that he's been in really since the most recent Euros. And then you've also got two fantastically talented players alongside him in Vitinha and João Neves, who Arsenal just never really felt like they got on top of.
So are there any positives for Arsenal, would you say? Maybe that, they didn't have, you could say that they don't have Thomas Partey. They did have some chances. Any positives for Arsenal fans to take from it?
I think there are still some positives. I mean, you've got to look at the fact that this is still a very young PSG side, a PSG team that's still learning and gaining experience. So it's there is still that possibility that they could be overawed by the occasion, being 1-0 up in the semi-final second leg, playing at home. Also, if Arsenal were to get the first goal at Parc des Princes, how long until the sort of PSG supporters start to get on the home players' backs a little bit? So I do think that first goal in Paris is going to be absolutely crucial. And if Arsenal can be the ones who get it and come flying out of the traps, then it could completely change the complexion of the tie in the game. We mentioned earlier the possible absence of Ousmane Dembele. But I think as well, when you look at the chances that PSG passed up in the first leg and the fact that it's haunted them a number of times over the last couple of years in Europe, particularly last season, not even being able to score against Borussia Dortmund, that I think is something that will still be on the minds of some of the PSG players. And also when you look at how they raced into the lead in the second leg against Villa and then sort of switched off, if complacency sets in a little bit and they feel like the hardest part has been done ahead of this second leg, I also think there's the potential for Arsenal to catch PSG out that way. But like I said before, this is a much changed PSG side now, so there is also an opportunity to continue to show that new face, and PSG will be determined to do so. So it's not going to be easy for Arsenal for sure, but yeah, I don't think it's mission impossible just yet for the Gunners either.
So there is a case for why they could still win this tie. I'm sure Arsenal fans will be happy to hear that. Finally, how do you expect PSG to go into this next leg? How do you think they will approach it, considering that they are leading, but like you say, they're only leading by 1 goal?
I've been impressed with how pragmatic Luis Enrique has become over the last year or so, because it's not something that's normally associated with his managerial style, but he has an ability to get his team to dig in when they need to. But I think it would be dangerous to do that from the very beginning here. And I think they will look to potentially try to avoid what has happened against other Premier League sides already in the competition this year, and that's allowing them to score first. It happened not only with Liverpool and Villa, but also with Manchester City as well in the league phase. So that's something that they will really be trying to prevent from happening. But I do think as well that this is a PSG side that will now feel like this is really their opportunity, and it's very, very tough to see them having a better opening to potentially make it to a Champions League final. I mean, many people thought it wouldn't get much better than Borussia Dortmund last season, but then they made hard work of that. So if they were to now make hard work of a second leg, having gone up in the first leg, I think big questions would probably be asked in Paris of that. So there's definitely going to be an expectation around Parc des Princes that PSG get the job done, especially because they're in a situation where the league is already sewn up, and the only other thing they've got to worry about for the remainder of the season is the domestic cup final. So I certainly think that the fans will be waiting there with bated breath. And we saw, how important their support can be, to PSG away from home. You multiply that by 10 at home, and it becomes pretty intimidating for visiting teams.
Well, there you have it. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest football content. Let us know if you think Arsenal can get to the final. And remember, we will have commentary of the game live from the Parc des Princes on talkSPORT on Wednesday night, with all the build-up from 7 p.m. ahead of an 8 o'clock kickoff.